Welcome back to Sharpen the Point. We continue our look at the ACC, breaking down what each team is losing, returning, and bringing in for next season. Today, we're going to take a look at two of the longest tenured coaches in Dave Dorn at NC State and Pat Narduzzi at Pitt, each of which has kind of had a little bit of a downturn lately, but I highly respect both. Long believing that Dave Dorn's one of the more underrated coaches in all of college football, given what he's been capable of doing with less resources to an extent at NC State. And then an SMU team that continues to perform at the top since joining the conference under the guidance of Rhett Lashley. Everybody's kind of been going after Lashley, trying to get him, and he stayed put because there's plenty of money back in those Mustangs. Starting things off, though, with NC State. Interesting team given the quarterback situation. CJ Bailey, a guy that I was very high on coming into last year, performed very well. I think a guy that teams probably tried to go after, but he stayed put. The wrinkle, as far as I go with the fantasy aspect, is Will Wilson was poaching touchdowns in that red zone, left, right, and center, which he is the heir apparent more than likely. They did not let him throw the ball at all, and he even had an interception on his limited pass attempts. But the man had double-digit touchdowns on the ground, and that is a source of frustration because I think CJ Bailey is a fairly mobile quarterback, big-bodied guy. He should be able to handle those touches. They just seem to not want to give him those touches. So highly frustrating on that end, but Bailey, I think, continues to take steps forward, continues to be the guy we hoped he would be, a guy that I thought maybe MJ Morris could have ended up being until he took it over. But ultimately, it'll be interesting to see early in the season what Will Wilson does on the ground and whether we have a Devin Dampier, Bird Ficklin situation on our hands that ends up limiting the upside that CJ Bailey does possess. Running back wise, Hollywood Smothers moves on to Texas. He got a bag there. I personally did not think he performed as well as we thought he would. So it stands to reason that they were smart to move on from him and kind of let him go. I thought Duke Scott looked better in his limited opportunities for the most part, especially late in the season. Now, he's not going to be the pass catcher that Hollywood Smothers was, but Smothers kind of lacked a little bit here and there for me. They were really replacing him in the red zone here and there, specifically taking over those. Will Wilson was taken away from not only Bailey, but also Smothers in that red zone. So a lot of concern there for what the upside for Duke Scott is as far as finding the end zone outside of those longer touchdown breaking runs. So I'm not concerned that Smothers is gone. It does cost them a useful piece, but I do think the addition of Davian Gauss from North Carolina makes up for that, and he ends up pairing in tandem with Scott being the top guy in the room and Gauss being the secondary role player, likely getting about 20% of the touches by comparison to the 40 to 50% that Duke Scott should be getting. Wide receiver wise, I'll be honest, this was an awful room, an absolutely awful room. I know Terrell Anderson transferred to USC. I don't expect him to do much there. He did not perform the way I'd hoped he would. Noah Rogers is a ton of talent that still can't put it together. He moves on to Alabama. Don't quite know why. He did virtually nothing. By comparison, there was some hope that maybe he would end up being one of those Ohio State guys that kind of got forced out. Wesley Grimes didn't do a whole lot. Coming over from Wake Forest, was really not an impactful player. I think the leader of this room and the top guy ends up being Teddy Hoffman. Teddy Hoffman was a guy that early in the season had a couple big games here and there, and it was kind of based on limited targets, but his targets per route run were off the charts. He was barely on the field, didn't play many snaps, but seemed to get the ball thrown to him every time he was on the field. I expect Teddy Hoffman to take a big step forward and be a guy that ends up likely leading the room more than likely. But I am a big Victor Snow guy from his days at Buffalo. I thought he was a great player for them. That is not a extensive passing offense, and he was still able to put up over 800 yards and 8 touchdowns in a MAC conference that does not cater to the pass game, specifically with the weather later in the year. So I think Snow can build on it. Maybe Snow ends up being the guy that leads the team in targets. Hoffman has the most upside on the outside as far as the big games go, but Snow is a guy that can come in and perform very well as a complementary piece and or the top piece in this offense. Outside of him, I discount Dozier. I'm interested to see what they can do with the reclamation project that is Josiah Trader. We just saw an image come out this week of him looking pretty stout, pretty built. And can he put it together? I'm not the biggest fan of Josiah Trader. Maybe he does it. Maybe he doesn't. I'm not going to count on it. I would lean Hoffman. I lean Snow. And then I think Trader has the potential to kind of be the third guy in the room. Tight end wise, it was a very good production year for Justin Jolie. He outperformed everything that we thought. He was mainly a short target, did not create a lot of explosives, but was a weapon in the red zone. We'll have to kind of wait and see who ends up taking over that spot. I think Hunter Provience has a shot. I think Vander Plug also has a shot. That's kind of where I don't think they end up utilizing the tight end as much this season, and they end up utilizing the wide receivers that are slightly upgraded, in my opinion, compared to a year ago. Offensive line wise, 3 out of 5 now gone. I did lose a good bit to transfers. Jacarius Pete going to South Carolina is the notable one. I think Rico Jackson likely ends up getting a spot along this line, pairing up with Spike Souls and Teague Anderson. Questions remain as far as center. I think that ends up being Rylan Van. But then the left tackle spot is a question mark. Potentially Daniel Cruz could make a run at Van for that starting center role. And then Jamarian McCrimmon is going to end up fighting with Jalen Hampton. Hampton came over from, I want to say it was UT Martin, started a ton there. It was a second team Big South performer. So potential for Hampton to end up taking that role, but it's such a big step up in class that I would tend to lean towards McCrimmon having a leg up on him for that left tackle spot. Defensively, it was a down year for these guys. This is typically a unit that would perform very well. Did not perform up to expectation under a Dorn-led team, but still returns enough with Shirley and Bond. Josiah Victor is a solid nose tackle prospect that can hold down the middle. But they needed to add some stuff. And I think the addition of Harvey Dyson was a big add out of Tulane, brings some pedigree, some sack capability. So seeing what he can do, Katron Evans likely steps into a larger role in that defensive tackle room. But typically speaking, you would buy into a Dorn-led defense. But after last season, I do have some question marks as to what they're going to be able to do. They do have some pass rush, though, which I do like. Linebacker-wise, a lot goes out of this room. A whole lot coming out of the room. Where they turn, I think they're definitely going to be Raul Aguirre out of Miami. Seems like a guy that's going to step right in and be the top guy in the room more than likely, and then have to lean on some of these younger guys in like a Kayvon Carter, LaCorian Hodge, hoping that they take steps forward, maybe a Zane Williams. So some questions to be answered here in this room outside of Aguirre to see what they can do there. All right, defensive back wise, still held together here, which is going to be big for them. They need that to stick together in order to try to create some continuity after how it kind of performed a year ago. Do lose top corner Devon Marshall, but bring back Jackson Vick to play at one corner spot. Assad Brown, Brian Nelson, solid pieces around them. Teasdale and Ronnie Royal, important to bring back as well. So they're set up pretty well there. I think King Mack probably gets a starting role more than likely, given his pedigree. We'll just kind of have to wait and see how this plays out. I think long term, Andre Evans is a piece that could work out, but not something they're going to try to rely on here in year one. Overall, I need to see it out of this defense. I think they're going to be able to run the football well. I think they got upgrades at the offensive skill positions, but there is plenty that needs to be proven going into this season in order to believe that they are still very good. Moving into the Pitt Panthers. I love Cade Bell in this system. It severely upgraded the ceiling of a Narduzzi team because he typically was just heavy run, very little heavy offense, like high scoring. We saw it kind of under when Kenny, what was his name? Anyway, it's bothering me that I do not know this name. Quarterback that went to Pittsburgh, a stunk once he got there. Anyway, with the gloves, he was a Heisman guy, Heisman type guy. But they had good production there. They just never really otherwise were great under Narduzzi in that system, trying to play it very slow. Cade Bell revolutionized the system. Eli Holstein looked great. And the concern for me is that Holstein 2 years ago was really good. Heinzel comes in, looks good, and shows all these flashes. Is he Holstein this year, who just doesn't look good again? Now, he doesn't have the competition necessarily that Heinzel was able to present to Holstein. So Holstein's gone now, goes to UVA. I'd imagine that the reins are fully on Mason Heinzel. To some extent, I think Holstein just kind of beat up on bad competition, and that's why he ended up being there. And I thought Heinzel looked better against better competition. So I would buy more into Heinzel than I did into Holstein heading into last season. Running back wise, a sad day for all of us that Desmond Reed was not able to stay healthy. Had the monster year 2 years ago. Last year was just a massive disappointment. Just never got going. Never was able to stay healthy. It did provide opportunity for Jakarian Turner. Do like that kid long term. He fits the system very well. He's a Desmond Reed light. Lavelle Wright, coming over from Western Kentucky, kind of knows that similar system. Is a guy that could be able to spell and play more of a Jules Goff role. But long term, I do have concerns about who is behind Turner and how they perform going forward. I would have liked to have kept Jules Goff instead of him running to Boise in that situation. Wide receiver wise, weird system. Hard to predict week to week who is going to be able to come forward and do work. Poppy Williams now gone. Kenny Johnson gone. Those were kind of the 1A, 1B. They would kind of trade off weeks as to who was good, who wasn't. I think Blue Hicks probably steps up, gets some more target volume in this spot. Sincere Lee, similarly, probably gets some more target volume in this spot. Malik Knight, probably a guy that ends up performing right out the gate. And then it's kind of a who knows? You know, it's the guys that are replacing the depth pieces because your depth pieces are now replacing your top options. Heinzel's going to be able to get these guys the ball. I'd suspect Hicks and Lee, along with Knight, being the top three, but none being a prolific target earner, similar to what we had with Poppy Williams and Kenny Johnson. Tight end wise, they have not utilized it near as much as they did in the previous offensive styles. Justin Holmes played fairly well, likely to be able to continue similar traits there. Malachi Thomas, they lose some depth there with him going to LSU. They replaced it, though, with Carson Kent coming over from Oklahoma. Tight end's never going to be a sexy position in college football, let's be honest, outside of like a Kenyon Sadiq, Michael Trigg type situation. Offensive line, still together fairly well, returning 3 out of 5. Jeff Percy graduating, not really a big deal because Kendall Stanley will just step into a full-time role. And then Lyndon Cooper transferring to Vanderbilt. That's probably the biggest loss, but I would suspect we see one of the guards that's returning step into that role more than likely. Otherwise, you're kind of looking at like a Keelan Davis coming over from Akron, and I don't think I'd put my eggs in that basket, but something to keep an eye on. Feel pretty comfortable with that offensive line and where it's at as far as the continuity from year to year. Defensively, not their best unit last year. They could stand to get a little bit better. It's still a solid unit, but not the that we've seen with the NC State defense by comparison. Lots of returning production, though, at the top with Isaiah Neal, Jimmy Scott, Nick James, and then Sean Fitzsimmons. Love the depth that they have along the defensive tackles situation with that rotation. Want to see how well these guys on the outside pair up with a Jimmy Scott to be able to rush the passer. Good push out of Isaiah Neal, though, in that more 5-tech. Jimmy Scott off the edge did well with those 6 sacks. Like to see him take another step forward. And then realistically just need the secondary pass rusher to kind of step up. Maybe that ends up being a Zach Crothers, who performed pretty well in a freshman season. Jeremiah Warren and Nairn are going to put in some work, though. They're going to end up being some depth pieces that could contribute along that line. Linebacker-wise, Rasheem Biles is a massive loss, in my opinion. Kind of a do-it-all guy, was able to create some pass rush off the edge, goes to Texas. There's a reason he went to Texas, because he was a stud. So losing Biles is going to hurt. Lovelace, like to watch that kid. If you want to watch a guy on this defense just fly around and hawk the ball, that's Braylon Lovelace. Really enjoy watching that kid. So he's a guy to watch anytime you turn on a Pitt Panther game. Kyle Lewis, I thought was a good player. I was kind of surprised at how he's dropped in the draft this weekend, but we'll have to kind of wait and see there as to where he ends up in his next step. Cameron Lindsey likely steps into a more full-time role, and then we'll have to see. I think DeMarco Ward likely gets into a starting role with Lindsey and Lovelace, and then you get Sanford adding some depth and some rotation capability to this defense. They could end up transferring one of these guys into more of a pass rush specialist, similar to kind of what Biles was doing, getting good pressure off the edge there. Defensive back-wise, bringing back Brookins at strong safety is going to be the key. He's going to need to be a top guy in the room. They do have some corners that were young that got good experience a year ago that should grow, and Shadarian Harrison and Sean Lee do lose a little bit of depth with Rashad Battle and Taman Lynham. So adding Rayon Strader, I think, is going to be an underrated pickup. He was really good at Miami of Ohio before going to Auburn. Didn't really get a huge chance there. I think he steps right in to a prominent role on the outside for these guys and gives them a ton of depth at the outside positions, and then just filling in around Brookins with those guys. Should be a talented secondary, that can ball hawk a little bit and step up and make some more plays. Overall, I think the defense is going to be at worst similar, if not slightly improved on the back end. A little bit worried about the linebacking core by comparison. Do think the front is solid enough. Generating that pass rush is going to be key. And then on the offensive side of the football, you do lose the explosiveness that is Desmond Reed. You lose the top 2 wide receivers. But if Heinzel can take a step forward that Eli Holstein never took, they have the capability to play some solid ball and surprise some people in the top half of the ACC. Moving into the SMU Mustangs. I full transparency. I am not a Kevin Jennings believer. I thought what he did last year was a lot closer to what he should have done the year before. He outperformed in year 1, did not perform in year 2. I'm just not a guy. It's similar to Marcel Reed, right? I'm just not a guy that is all in on that. Now, I think he's going to be a plenty decent college quarterback. He's going to be able to win you some games. I think he has the capability to lose you games, but that is a concern. He is a concern for me long term. I just don't think he's just this massive talent that that you can ride to a championship, like a overall long-term playoff run for my money. Running back wise, lose TJ Harden. Harden played about what I thought he would do, slightly worse to an extent, had his moments. Chris Johnson is a surprise move for me with him bolting to go to Clemson. Thought he would take over the backfield with the majority of the work, and then having McFall kind of be the secondary guy with Jermecco Green getting a little work here and there. Him going makes this very interesting because the likely situation at this point now is McFall, Green, and Rhodes potentially jumping in and needing to pick up the slack. It feels like they're going to end up needing to throw the football a good bit, which I don't really want to rely on Kevin Jennings' arm completely. I would prefer to have a safe back like a Brashard Smith, like a TJ Harden, that I know what I'm going to get out of him. I think you would have known what you were getting out of Chris Johnson Jr. So losing that was a big loss to the ceiling of the run game for my money. Wide receiver wise, Jordan Hudson was the clear top guy. This offense does always feature one top option. I'm 90% certain that ends up being Jalen Cooper, who steps right into that role. The kid came right in last year in his freshman season, and anytime Hudson was missing, he stepped right up. Brinson did a yeoman's work here and there, but it was Cooper who impressed me the most as far as long-term capability. Ymir Knight, fine slot receiver. He'll be on the field. Trusted weapon. Not my favorite guy. He was a good player at JMU, not necessarily a great talent for an ACC team. The question is what does Yannick Smith, who comes over from East Carolina, do? I think he ends up on the outside starting with Cooper and Ymir Knight in the slot. And then what is the upside of Jalen Hale, who just could not crack that rotation at Alabama? He has upside. He has capability. I think he's going to end up rotating on and more than likely replacing Knight at sometimes, replacing a Yannick Smith and kind of being that rotational receiver similar to what Jalen Cooper was a year ago. But this just does feel like Jordan Hudson was very Rashee Rice a year ago. I think that ends up being Jalen Cooper as the one. He will be the guy that I buy into early in the season as the guy getting the most targets for this team. Tight end wise, they featured the tight end a ton. And Hibner was solid. Maryland wasn't. He was a shell of himself. Maryland is now in the NFL. Don't know why he's not marked out. Have to update that. But Hibner and Maryland combined were very talented. I think all of that work ends up going to Randy Pittman as the receiving option. And I think we see Pittman have a very good season for SMU as that tight end receiving option that we saw flashes from Hibner and Maryland. He will have plenty of flashes. Very good move tight end. Came with Malzahn from UCF to Florida State. He ended up using him in a ton of different ways. I'm pretty certain there was a game he had a rushing touchdown a receiving touchdown and a passing touchdown. I think that might have been UVA where he did all three, but a versatile weapon capable of creating a ton of mismatches at the tight end position. This offensive line performed very well a year ago. Returns 3 out of 5 starters. Love that the right side is all returning. Love that PJ Williams is still there. Do lose the left side, Logan Parr being one that's going to be tough to replace. Had a ton of good depth overall here. What do they decide to do with that left side is interesting for me. Do they continue with an in-house option in like a Graham Uter, an Abel Hoopy? Is it, is there the possibility that a Andrew Chamblee or PJ Williams sends over to the left side? That could be an interesting wrinkle. I think that's something we need to keep an eye on overall. And then what does a Drew Evers come in, as a good top end interior line recruit? Maybe he ends up slotting in early. I would suspect we end up seeing one of the returnees get the first crack at it, but he's kind of sitting there, and we'll have to wait and see on that. This defense was nasty a year ago. Problem is they're all gone. They created a ton of havoc rushing the passer. You got Cameron Robertson, Isaiah Smith, Trey Webb, Jeffrey Imba, all gone, all with 6 or more sacks. How do they replace that production? I think Ja'Kai Lang is a guy that can step up off the edge and do a job there. Wu Spencer likely to step into a more prominent role in the defensive tackle spots. Kevin Allen, very similar, going to step in and take on a bigger portion of his rotation. Can they get Ira Singleton from USF to create that edge rush to pair with Ja'Kai Lang? I'm not too concerned with Ja'Kai Lang. I think he's going to do a good job. More concerned with the other side. I think the defensive tackle spot is just a lack of depth situation. But overall, not a bad unit. It should be downgraded, though, from a year ago. I wouldn't expect similar production out of that defensive line room. Linebacker-wise, they're in great shape, though. This is where they're going to make up for these guys, right? They're going to make up for that loss along the front because you bring back Brandon Booker, Alexander Kilgore, Brandon Miazano. Bringing all that back is huge. Now, they know the guys behind them knew that obviously they weren't going to get the same run. The depth was great here a year ago, but they all transfer out. Did replace some of that depth with Caden Marshall from Bowling Green and Jamal Anderson out of Clemson, but they're just depth pieces. The starters are the starters, and they need those guys to perform to be able to clean up kind of, especially early in the season, some of that front rotation where there's a little bit more question marks. The back end performed great as well. Do graduate both safeties and a corner, but bring back some guys that should be able to play pretty well overall. Marcellus Barnes being the top corner coming back. William Nettles, a guy that I think long-term is going to be very solid for them and be able to play a prominent role. Tyron Polley at safety is going to be important to step right in. So a good back end with some continuity. Jarvis Lee, a nice pickup out of South Florida as well. We'll have to kind of wait and see on this end. I think that they have plenty of good depth and talented depth to be able to mitigate those top losses. But there is some question marks in the safety spots as to how they're going to be able to translate. I think on the outside, they're still very strong, though. And overall, we're kind of looking at a team that I worry about the run game. I think it's going to have to go through a lot through Kevin Jennings, which Lashley's going to get production out of that. I like the wide receiving core. I think it's even, slightly could be improved depending on the step that Cooper takes. The tight end room still very talented with Pittman. The offensive line still very good. Defensive line, couple questions there. That's probably the weakness early in the season. And then that leadership on the back end is somewhat questionable It's very young back end overall, and how they continue to perform. But nonetheless, these are three teams that should be in the upper portion of the All Coast Conference, as I like to call it, with SMU being a top contender, certainly to push towards the front, and a team that can compete for a spot in the ACC title game.